foremost, I want to say thank you to my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. If it wasn't for him, this wouldn't be possible. Low Nose Boxing. Hit the like button, share the video, leave a comment, let's subscribe. I got a question. Errol Spence Jr., if he were to retire today, would Errol Spence Jr. get into the Hall of Fame? That's a very interesting question. You see, before Errol Spence Jr. fought Terrence Crawford and suffered that loss, a lot of people had Errol Spence very high on that top 10 pound-for-pounders. Me personally, I had Errol Spence in the top 5 pound-for-pound in boxing. Terrence Crawford beat Errol Spence bad. He dominated him. He outclassed him. He showed that he's levels above him. He beat him so bad that personally I do not want to see that rematch. I don't see any difference at all in what could happen. Now let's get to the topic. Errol Spence Jr., is he still going to be a Hall of Famer? Boxing fans are very fickle, because I hear a lot of boxing fans say no. It's like he suffered one loss and right away they want to toss him and throw him in the trash, throw him in the garbage. This is low-nose boxing. I'm not doing that. That's not how I carry it. What I will say about Errol Spence, he was a 3-belt holder, unified champion in the welterweight division. At the time when the welterweight division was the best division in boxing, the money division in boxing. When you had Errol Spence there, Keith Thurman, Danny Garcia, Sean Porter, Terrence Crawford, Errol Spence fought all those guys with the exception of Keith Thurman, and then he fought Terrence Crawford. He never fought Manny Pacquiao, by the way. But Errol Spence took on most of those guys, right? So we're going to talk about his resume. Errol Spence has victories over Eudenis Ugas, coming off of an upset win over Manny Pacquiao. Errol Spence defeated Sean Porter in a very close fight, but I did have Errol Spence winning that fight. Errol Spence has a victory over Danny Garcia, coming off of a layoff, coming off of a car crash. Now that's a very big win for me, because a lot of people, including myself, felt that Errol Spence should have took on the tune-up fight, but instead he took on the top 5 welterweight, one of the hardest punchers in the division, and Errol Spence beat Danny Garcia convincingly. It was a competitive fight, but he won that fight convincingly. He beat Danny Garcia more convincingly than Sean Porter and Keith Thurman did. Coming off of a layoff, coming off of a life-threatening accident. Errol Spence gains a lot of points for that, right? Then he suffered an eye injury, came back from surgery, and took on Eudenis Ugas. Yeah, Eudenis Ugas is not a world beater, but at the time, he was at his best. He was generating a lot of momentum. He was on a win streak, and he came off of defeating Manny Pacquiao. So those are 2 good wins for Errol Spence, along with the Sean Porter win, right? And let's not forget he defeated Kell Brook. And I don't want to hear people say, oh, Kell Brook was coming off of that loss to Triple G. But Errol Spence was the first to beat him at 147 pounds, right? He also defeated Lamont Peterson, former world champion at 140. He beat Chris Algieri, former world champion at 140. And then he beat Mikey Garcia, right? And I already know what the haters are going to say. Mikey Garcia was coming up 2 weight classes. Yes, he was. His previous fight was at 135 pounds. But he did fight at 140 twice, when he soundly beat Keith Thurman and he beat Sergey Lipinets. Mikey Garcia, to me, was a top 5 pound-for-pound fighter, right? So I'm going to give Errol Spence some credit for that win, because Mikey Garcia went on to defeat Jesse Vargas, who was a pretty decent welterweight, and he dropped him. Mikey Garcia showed that his power is real. Errol Spence demoralized Mikey Garcia and outclassed him 12 rounds to zip, even though he was supposed to beat him. But he did beat him at the end of the day. And Mikey Garcia is a fighter who I feel is going to go into the Hall of Fame one day, along with Danny Garcia and possibly Sean Porter, right? So those are the guys that Errol Spence beat. Those are his best wins. Pretty decent, pretty solid, right? And then his accolades. I already know what y'all gonna say. Errol Spence only won titles in one weight classes. Pound for pound, you have to jump up and down weight classes. Not all the time. Marvelous Marvin Hagler was the reigning undisputed middleweight champion. Made so many title defenses. Fought the best fighters. And he's a legend. And Marvin Hagler at one point was #1 pound for pound. Right? That's the argument that people gave me when I told them that Errol Spence was on my top 5 list. The people that didn't have him on that list would throw that weight class jump to me all the time. He only been a champion in one weight class. Still, he was the most dominant champion. He held 3 belts in a 4-belt era, right? In one of the best eras in welterweight history. This was a pretty decent welterweight era, not the best one. You know, you got other eras, the 80s with Sugar Ray Leonard, Tommy Hearns, Duran, those guys. You had the 90s with Trinidad, De La Hoya, Ike Corte. You know, you had the Miguel Cotto, Shane Mosley, Margarito, Paul Williams, Floyd Mayweather. This was a pretty decent welterweight class. And Errol Spence was the top dog until he fought Terrence Bud Crawford. Now, don't get me wrong, Errol Spence Jr.'s style is pretty basic. I don't think Errol Spence would do that good had he fought in different eras. I don't think Errol Spence would be a champion if he fought in the 80s or the 90s. But for what he did in this era, in this generation, you got to give him consideration into being a Hall of Fame fighter. And nowadays, in fact, the Hall of Fame, one of the criteria, if I'm not correct, is fame, popularity. There's some fighters in the Hall of Fame that I feel Errol Spence did more than. Example, Arturo Gatti, all due respect, heck of a fighter, but I think Errol Spence won more big fights than Gatti did. He unified at welterweight, 3 belts. Gatti never did nothing like that. Gatti lost most of his big fights, and he made it into the Hall of Fame, right? So on a popularity level, Errol Spence is pretty up there as well because he did headline 5 pay-per-views, if I'm not correct. I don't think Errol Spence is someone that you can mention in the mythical fantasy matchup against the guys like Sugar Ray Leonard, Roberto Duran, Tommy Hearns, Wilfredo Benitez. I think those guys will smoke Errol Spence. Errol Spence will be competitive against Oscar and Trinidad and Corte, but those guys will beat him as well. But for his era, Errol Spence made some noise. In my book, Errol Spence Jr. will go into the Hall of Fame one day. Now, if he goes on to accomplish more greatness, moves up in weight, becomes a world champion again, absolutely. But if he were to retire right now, I still believe he would get into the Hall of Fame someday. I don't think it'll be a first ballot situation, but I think Errol Spence has carved up a Hall of Fame worthy career. And this is not me making a video as if he retired. This is just based off a conversation I had with somebody. So with that being said, Errol Spence Jr. is a Hall of Famer by the skin of his teeth, but a Hall of Famer. So you already know what to do. Hit the like button, share the video, leave a comment, subscribe. Low Nose Boxing, because Low Nose Boxing. I'm out.